Yeah, well, we have one of the worst starts of the year since 2016. Right? So I think, people are starting to realize that, between now and the Chinese New Year, probably there's a vacuum of policy. Right, so they're probably not going to come out with a stronger stimulus policy just before the Chinese New Year. So maybe the central bank is going to do some OMO, open market operation, to inject some liquidity for the Chinese New Year, because that's a period where you need intense liquidity injection. Because during the Chinese New Year, people give out red packets and all that, and it tends to be in cash. Right, so it's a season that requires quite a bit of liquidity in the system. But other than that, people were thinking, they'll wait until the twin session in March to see more details on the policy before they're ready to make another move on the market.
大家好，今天给大家带来的是洪灏对中国经济的一个展望吧，算是。很多人也都说啊，洪灏他的中文演讲和英文演讲，说的完全是两个意思啊。今天我们也来看一看他的中文和英文对比起来啊，是不是真的差距那么大？
Partner and chief economist at Grow Investment Group, and it hasn't really been sort of perhaps the greatest start to the year that policymakers in China would have seen, just given the amount that they're coming out to try and stir up and generate support for the economy, for the market outlook. What are you making of 2025 so far?
Yeah, well, we have one of the worst starts of the year since 2016. Right? So I think, people are starting to realize that, between now and the Chinese New Year, probably there's a vacuum of policy. Right, so they're probably not going to come out with a stronger stimulus policy just before the Chinese New Year. So maybe the central bank is going to do some OMO, open market operation, to inject some liquidity for the Chinese New Year, because that's a period where you need intense liquidity injection. Because during the Chinese New Year, people give out red packets and all that, and it tends to be in cash. Right, so it's a season that requires quite a bit of liquidity in the system. But other than that, people were thinking, they'll wait until the twin session in March to see more details on the policy before they're ready to make another move on the market.
Yeah, if we look at history, any potential liquidity injection before the Lunar New Year will likely spur even a short-term rally. The question I have for you is, right, would you buy the current dip, for example, Hao Hong?
Yeah, well, I think it's still not attractive enough for me to buy. I mean, even though the liquidity injection before the Chinese New Year tend to be very strong, but it's also expected by the market, right? So because every year they more or less do the same thing, and also right now because the trade war risk is rising. Donald Trump is getting into the office very soon, right? So tariff is one of the first things he's gonna execute. So I think people are waiting for further signal to see further currents to see what's gonna happen next, and that's the reason why we're seeing substantial depreciation pressure on the Chinese yuan.
So you said that the conditions aren't quite favourable just yet for you to consider buying. What do you think does make it more favourable then? Do you see further weakness and then just the valuations are the reason to get in? Or do you actually think that it's more the policy side and you get enough of an announcement that's concrete enough to be attractive to you?
Yeah, well, I think for the Chinese equity to do better this year, firstly we need to see a pause, at least a pause in the decline of the property price, right? So because in the past couple of years, because of the property price continue to decline, it actually erode people's confidence in the economy, and also take away the consumption power as well. I think secondly, you need to see a expansion of the government's balance sheet, right? So you need to see a very strong fiscal stimulus, right? So I think the central government balance sheet is the only balance sheet that is still clean enough for expansion in this cycle. But I think so far we haven't seen concrete signal for the central government to expand its balance sheet. And I think thirdly, we need to see more policy on how to promote consumption and improve social welfare for the Chinese people. I think back then, especially in the past couple of years, because the property sector has been falling, therefore, most of the new investments has gone into manufacturing. And actually, the Chinese government directed the Chinese banks to lend to the manufacturing sector, and that creates a huge overcapacity in that sector, and also, substantial deflationary pressure. So I think, these three things are probably the key sort of indicator that we'll be looking for in this year for the Chinese stocks to do better.
Interesting that you phrase it that way, Hao Hong. Speaking of lending, speaking of leading indicators, we spoke earlier with B of A, and interesting how they frame the possible timeline for the rally. They say, wait for credit to pick up, wait for a few months before the economy and the rally can sustain itself. And funnily enough, first few days of 2025, they're already saying that 2026 will be the year that the economy starts to respond. I want to get your thoughts on this, but let's play it out for our viewers, please, if we can.
So if credit growth start to accelerate in January, let's say, for the GDP to really accelerate or rebound, it's probably 4 quarters away. But for GDP to stop declining fast, declining slower, second derivative factor turnaround is 2 quarters away. Market leads fundamental, right? Market is typically in between. So from credit acceleration to more sustained market rebound, I would say it's probably around 2-3 quarters.
Hao Hong, what do you think of that timeline there?
It's pure speculation, I have to say. I think in September, late September, we've seen a large injection of liquidity into the system, right? So the PBOC came out and said, wow, we're going to lend you, 300 billion, 500 billion worth of liquidity to buy stocks, and people get excited. And the market rallied for 2 weeks and taper off, and then and we've been falling since then. So I would say that liquidity is important. The Chinese market is always very responsive to changing liquidity condition, but then at the same time, one has to realize that at this moment, there's more than enough liquidity in the system, right? So if you look at the short-term Chinese Treasury, now it's approaching 1%, right? So the 10-year Chinese Treasury is making his historic low, and it's actually lower than the Japanese JGB, right? So it's telling you that there's plenty of liquidity slushing around in the system, because even though the central bank has been printing money, but I think people, because of the lack of confidence, people are somehow reluctant to reinvest those liquidity into production, and that is the reason why we actually have excess liquidity. If you look at the Chinese household, the bank deposit has increased from 10 trillion yuan to 15, 16 trillion yuan, maybe even more, right? Much of this money is looking for a home, and that's the reason why you have abundant liquidity and also a suppression of the Chinese bond yield in the market.
That's sort of the problem. I mean, it's the perception. People need to feel confident to borrow. They need to feel confident to invest. Right. You're in Shanghai right now. I'm wondering what the sense is that you're getting on the ground when you're talking to people there, because I think it's also just interesting the timing. We are just a couple of weeks out now from the Lunar New Year break. People are still kind of in that wind down phase as well.
Yeah, I think traditionally during this time of the year, people will be packing up, getting ready to go home. Surprisingly, this year we're still seeing plenty of activities going on, right? So, for example, just now the Caixin PMI is showing a substantial expansion, and it's actually higher than expected. Construction industry is still going on, right? So that is telling you that people somehow, for some reason, people are working into the Chinese New Year, which is traditionally a quiet period. It's good for the Chinese economy, right? So, because normally, in January and February, you look at the economy, people basically stop everything and go home for the Chinese New Year and reunite with their family. It's the biggest holiday in the Chinese calendar, but I think this year is very different, and it's producing some sort of a counter seasonality in the economic number. But no one's complaining, of course, because more production, more activities in the economy is good for the market and also good for the Chinese people.
How did your fund do last year? And after you answer that too, what would you be overweight? What plays would you be putting in place short term right now in this market?
Yeah, last year was the first year of my fund in the running. It's make more than 24% last year, and for most of the time I don't have position in the market. I only have position for a couple of weeks, and because last year most of the market gain is very concentrated in those few weeks. So if your market timing is right, you can actually get most of the return, without doing, a full year worth of work. Right? So can't complain. Last year was a good year for my fund. And I think for this year, we, like the rest of the market, we're still waiting for an opportunity to entry. Just now, we discussed the liquidity condition and exchange is very important for the Chinese market to rally. And most of us are hoping that, more policy signals going to come out during the twin session. And also, most of us is waiting for some sort of a signal from the US side, in terms of the tariff and the trade war. And also, in the second half of the year, some of us would, are looking for some sort of a grand bargain between China and the US, right? So, because if you look at the Chinese foreign trade sector, it built up a substantial foreign reserve, right? So on the central bank's balance sheet, you have 3.3 trillion US dollars. In overseas bank account, you have almost 2 trillion US dollars worth of forex reserve, right? So we're talking about a very substantial amount of money. And so from this perspective, because the Chinese exports the growth has been quite strong in the past couple of years, it's counterintuitive, right? So on one hand, you have a huge forex reserve, your export sector is going banana, but the Chinese yuan is under substantial depreciation pressure. It just doesn't make sense, right? So from an economic point of view, so I think the weakness in the Chinese yuan can be sort of a reverse, through a grand bargain. So a stronger Chinese yuan will help revalue the Chinese assets, and then at the same time, it sort of show the USI we have this very strong intention to improve the domestic sector, because a stronger Chinese yuan helps domestic consumption and helps the confidence as well. So of course, this is sort of a remote hope, right? So we're hoping this could happen probably towards the second half of the year, but it's not a certainty. So most of us are still waiting for some sort of signal to happen before we build up our positions in the market.
Hao Hong, thank you for coming in to our Shanghai studios.
Thank you.
Hao Hong there from Grow Investment Group. Out of Shanghai today for us. Right, just ahead here on the China Show, Nippon Steel planning to challenge President Biden's order to block its bid to take over U.S. Steel. We'll look at whether the deal has any hope of a revival, plus, of course, the latest out of Canada. Just ahead as well, this is Bloomberg.
整体看下来啊，和中文也没有太大的差别主要还是谈到了那几个问题。不过挺有意思的是啊，洪灏也透露了一下他24年的一个股市的一个收益，全年收益24%，但他在这里边也提到，这24%的收益啊，大概都是在几周内获得的。我估计啊，大概就是国庆之前频繁出政策那个时期那几周整个股市啊，包括 A 股啊，包括港股啊，走得比较强。其他的收益可能就来自于美股的收益。这里他提到一个观点啊，就是春节之前。政府释放流动性这件事是一个惯例，大家如果有投资 A 股的，自己可以去择时一下，看看考虑去抓一波这种流动性的机会但是一定要快进快出洪灏也提到的就是需求这一端，就是消费这一端，目前还没有特别好的一个政策入市我们整体的一个居民消费还是没有信心，需要等待政策确认。政策一旦确认之后呢，洪灏会根据政策的一个执行情况，看看找机会去进入 A 股市场。但是目前他的意思是他不会再配置 A 股市场。好了，本期视频就到这里，感谢大家收看。